The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees lining Oak Ridge Avenue, sending a cascade of amber and crimson leaves dancing across Sarah Mitchell's front yard. Inside the cozy New England colonial, 8-year-old Leo hunched over his sketchpad at the kitchen table, his small fingers gripping a worn charcoal pencil with surprising intensity. The scratching sound of lead against paper had become the soundtrack of their home since Leo's diagnosis 6 months ago. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah said, peering over her son's shoulder at the detailed drawing of an ancient oak tree with a car crushed beneath it. The precision in the sketch was remarkable. The splintered branches, the crumpled metal, even the license plate number meticulously rendered. Leo's developmental psychologist called it hyper-realistic memory processing, an uncommon but documented side effect of his selective mutism. Sarah tucked a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear, trying to ignore the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. Single parenting had never been part of her plan, but Ben's inability to cope with their daughter Emma's death had left her navigating Leo's trauma alone. The medical bills from Emma's final hospital stay still arrived monthly, each envelope like reopening a wound. Leo hadn't spoken a word since the accident that claimed his younger sister's life last winter. Instead, he processed his trauma through intensely detailed drawings, often depicting scenes of destruction or accidents. Dr. Winters had explained it was Leo's way of making sense of sudden loss, of trying to create order from chaos. Sarah squeezed Leo's shoulder gently. "Time for bed, my little artist." Leo nodded, sliding his sketchbook into his backpack. His wide hazel eyes, so like his father's, met hers briefly before he padded upstairs, leaving Sarah alone with the silence that had become their constant companion. She poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the family photo on the refrigerator. Ben in his police uniform, Sarah laughing, 5-year-old Leo grinning toothlessly, and Emma, just 3, with her blonde pigtails and dimpled smile. The photo had been taken at the Oak Ridge Summer Festival, just 4 months before the patch of black ice on Highway 27 changed everything. Sarah picked up her phone and called Ben, her estranged husband. "He drew another accident scene today," she said, her voice tight. "The oak tree on Miller's Road with a car underneath it. The detail is unsettling, Ben. The license plate, the exact pattern of the bark. It's like he's photographing these scenes with his mind." Ben sighed. As Oak Ridge's police chief, he'd seen how Leo's withdrawal had torn their family apart. "Sarah, Dr. Winters said we shouldn't focus on the negative themes. It's part of his processing." "I know, but they're getting more specific. License plates, locations, it's like he's obsessing over details. I'm worried he's not getting better. He's getting different." There was a long pause. Sarah could hear the murmur of the police station in the background. Ben had thrown himself into his work after Emma's death, as if solving every crime in Oak Ridge could somehow make up for his inability to protect his daughter. "I'll stop by tomorrow," he finally said. "Maybe we can take him fishing at Pearson's Lake, get him out of his head a bit. I've been meaning to check on the dam anyway. County sent over some maintenance reports that need reviewing." Sarah agreed and hung up, unaware of the storm front approaching their small town, or of the ancient oak on Miller's Road that had been weakening for years, its roots slowly losing their grip in the increasingly saturated soil. The forecast called for 3 inches of rain, but the meteorologists had been wrong before. They didn't know that this would be the wettest October in Oak Ridge's recorded history. Upstairs, Leo sat on his bed, a new sheet of paper before him. His hand moved with eerie precision as he began to draw the town library, its historic brick facade warmed by a glow that wasn't sunlight. At 2:17 a.m., Sarah bolted awake to the sound of sirens. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ben. "Accident on Miller's Road. Tree down on car. Don't tell Leo. Driver is Mrs. Henderson from Leo's school. She's okay, but shaken. Car matches drawing exactly. We need to talk." Heart racing, she stumbled to Leo's room, finding him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide but unsurprised. On his nightstand lay a new drawing, The town library with flames licking its historic facade, a tiny figure visible in the second-floor window. Sarah recognized the silhouette of Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly librarian who lived in the caretaker's apartment above the main reading room. The morning news confirmed what Sarah already knew. A massive oak had collapsed onto a passing vehicle during the night's storm. The driver, Marianne Henderson, Leo's former kindergarten teacher, survived with minor injuries, but the license plate matched the one in Leo's drawing. The local news reporter stood in front of the fallen giant, describing how the saturated ground had finally given way after years of erosion. A disaster that local arborists had apparently been warning about for months. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she stared at her son's sketchbook, rational explanations evaporating with each passing minute. Leo sat across from her, methodically arranging his cereal into perfect concentric circles, his face betraying no emotion. Had he heard about the tree's condition somewhere, overheard adult conversations, or was something far more inexplicable happening? "Leo," she said carefully, "how did you know about Mrs. Henderson's car?" Leo continued arranging his cereal, not acknowledging the question. His selective mutism had been accompanied by periods of dissociation, according to Dr. Winters. Moments when he seemed to retreat so deeply into himself that the outside world ceased to exist. Ben arrived by noon, his police uniform rumpled from an all-night shift, the tension between them temporarily suspended as they both grappled with the unsettling coincidence. He looked older somehow, grey streaking his temples in a way Sarah hadn't noticed before. When had that happened? "It's just chance," Ben insisted, rubbing his bloodshot eyes as they stood in the kitchen, voices lowered. "Leo's been drawing accidents for months. Statistically, something was bound to match eventually." Sarah pushed Leo's drawing of the burning library across the kitchen table. "And this, another coincidence waiting to happen?" Ben studied the detailed sketch, his law enforcement training kicking in despite his skepticism. The drawing showed specific details, flames emerging from the library's northeast corner, where the electrical room was located. The window where Mrs. Abernathy's silhouette stood was rendered with particular care, the old-fashioned curtains perfect in their detail. "The building inspector flagged some wiring issues last month," Ben admitted reluctantly. "The town's been slow approving the budget for repairs. The northeast corner houses the main electrical panel, which failed inspection. It's not public knowledge yet." Sarah's hands trembled as she poured more coffee. Neither of them would drink. What if he's not just processing trauma? What if he's somehow predicting things? "That's not possible, Sarah." But even as he said it, Ben picked up his phone and called the station, requesting an immediate inspection of the library's electrical system. He spoke with authority, citing anonymous tips and potential safety hazards, careful not to mention his son's drawing. That afternoon, they took Leo to Dr. Winter's office, bringing the drawings. The psychologist's office was a soothing space of muted blues and greens, with sound machines masking the noise from the busy street below. Leo immediately went to the sand tray, methodically creating a landscape, while the adults spoke in hushed tones. Dr. Winters listened attentively, her practiced neutrality slipping as they recounted the oak tree incident. She was a petite woman with a crown of silver hair and the kind of wrinkles that spoke of both laughter and concern. "Leo has always been highly observant," she said carefully, adjusting her glasses as she examined the drawings. "Children with selective mutism often develop heightened awareness of their surroundings as a compensatory mechanism. Perhaps he noticed the tree's deterioration or overheard conversations about the library's electrical problems and subconsciously incorporated them into his drawings," Sarah finished, desperate for the explanation to make sense. Dr. Winters nodded. "The human mind seeks patterns. It's why we see faces in clouds or meaning in coincidences. After trauma, this pattern seeking can intensify as we try to regain a sense of control." She paused, watching Leo meticulously recreate what looked like Pearson Lake in the sand tray. "There's a documented phenomenon called unconscious pattern recognition," People sometimes perceive and process information without conscious awareness. Leo might be noticing subtle cues, shifts in the ground around that tree, the smell of electrical burning at the library, that his conscious mind doesn't register, but his subconscious does. Through his drawings, Ben said slowly. Precisely. It's rare, but not unprecedented. There was a case study of a child in Chicago who drew a building collapse weeks before it happened. Investigators later found that the child had noticed subtle cracks in the foundation that adults had missed. As they left the appointment, walking through the crisp October air toward their separate cars, Ben's radio crackled with an urgent dispatch. Electrical fire at the town library, contained to the northeast utility room. No injuries reported. Mrs. Abernathy had been safely evacuated from her second-floor apartment. Leo didn't react to the news. But that night, he drew something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The Pearson Lake Dam with massive cracks spreading through its concrete face, water seeping through in ominous tendrils. In the foreground, he'd drawn a calendar page, October 15th, just 3 days away. The following days blurred into a waking nightmare for Sarah. The library fire had been attributed to the exact electrical issues depicted in Leo's drawing. When Ben's team discovered hairline fractures in the Pearson Lake Dam during an emergency inspection, even his steadfast skepticism began to waver. It doesn't mean anything, Ben insisted during a tense meeting with the town engineer in the municipal building. Rain lashed against the windows, punctuating his words with nature's counter-argument. The dam is 60 years old. Cracks are expected. Not these kinds of stress patterns, the engineer countered, pointing to the structural assessment on the conference room table. Gary Whitman had been Oak Ridge's civil engineer for over 30 years, his perpetually ink-stained fingers and rumpled appearance belying a brilliant mind. Look at these pressure points. The increased rainfall has raised the water table significantly. We're recommending immediate evacuation of the downstream areas until repairs can be completed. Ben ran a hand through his hair, aware of the political firestorm an evacuation order would create. The town council chairman, Harold Buchanan, had already called twice, concerned about unnecessary panic and the impact on the upcoming fall festival. How long have these cracks been developing? Ben asked. Gary shrugged. Impossible to say, without previous inspection data. The county's been cutting corners on maintenance for years. Budget cuts, you know how it is. But they didn't appear overnight. Back home, Leo had stopped going to school, instead filling notebook after notebook with increasingly elaborate drawings, all featuring water, destruction, and the dam. Sarah noticed something else. In each drawing, Leo included a small stick-figure family standing on Highland Ridge, safely above the flood zone. When she tried to ask him about the drawings, he would simply touch her hand and continue working, his focus unwavering. Mrs. Abernathy from the library had called to thank Sarah for the anonymous tip that had likely saved her life. Sarah had no explanation to offer. The local newspaper ran a small story about the fortuitous library inspection, praising the town's proactive safety measures. Only Sarah knew the truth, that her silent son somehow perceived dangers no one else could see. Ben moved back home temporarily, his police duties and concern for his family overriding their marital problems. They slept in separate rooms, the gulf between them both physical and emotional, but Leo seemed comforted by having both parents under one roof again. Late one night, Sarah found Ben studying Leo's drawings under the harsh light of the dining room table, case notes from his police files spread alongside them. "I don't believe in premonitions," he said without looking up, "but I can't ignore patterns either. The question is Leo somehow sensing things before they happen, or is something else going on?" Sarah sat across from him, the familiar gesture reminiscent of happier times when they would share late-night conversations over cups of tea. "What do you mean, something else?" Ben hesitated. "I've been looking into the incidents, the tree, the library. There's a connection I didn't see before." He pushed a file toward her. "Buchanan Development. Harold's company has been lobbying to develop the land around Pearson Lake for years. The council keeps voting it down because of environmental concerns. What does that have to do with Leo's drawings? Maybe nothing. But Harold was pushing for that old oak to be removed last year, said it was a hazard. The council preserved it as a historic landmark. And the library? Its historic status was blocking his plans for a new retail complex. Sarah's mind raced with implications. You think someone's deliberately causing these accidents? That's insane, Ben. Is it? Two convenient accidents that remove obstacles to Harold's development plans, and now the dam, the biggest obstacle of all. If it fails catastrophically, the environmental protections could be reassessed. But Leo's drawings, I don't know, Ben admitted. Maybe he's somehow overheard things. Harold's grandson is in Leo's class. Kids pick up more than we realize. The theory seemed far-fetched, but no more so than the idea that their son could somehow see the future. Sarah wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. The next morning, as rain pounded against the windows, heavier than forecast, Sarah discovered Leo had slipped out during her brief shower. Panic seized her until she found a note in his careful handwriting, his first communication in months. Highland Ridge. Now. Bring Dad. They found him at the observation point overlooking the valley, the dam visible in the distance through the curtain of rain. He pointed insistently at the massive structure just as emergency sirens began to wail across town. "Evacuation order! This is not a drill!" blared from Ben's radio. "Dam integrity compromised." Repeat, Pearson Dam integrity compromised. As they watched in horror, a section of the dam's face bulged outward under the pressure of days of rainfall and years of deferred maintenance. Ben grabbed his radio, relaying their position and confirming evacuation procedures already underway, thanks to the early warning from the inspection. Through his binoculars, Ben spotted something else, a figure at the base of the dam, moving with purpose. "That's Harold Buchanan," he said incredulously. "What the hell is he doing there?" The question hung between Sarah and Ben as the first streams of water began to break through the weakened concrete. How had Leo known? And was this disaster truly an accident? 6 months later, life in Oak Ridge had achieved a new normal. The flood had caused significant property damage, but no lives were lost thanks to the early evacuation. The investigation had revealed shocking findings. Harold Buchanan had been caught on security cameras tampering with the dam's drainage system, exacerbating the structural damage from the heavy rains. His subsequent arrest and the discovery of similar evidence linking him to the library fire had rocked the small community. The local newspaper had run a feature praising the fortuitous inspection that had saved the town, carefully avoiding any mention of how that inspection came to be ordered. Buchanan Development had collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and the town was now considering turning the land around Pearson Lake into a public nature preserve. Only Sarah, Ben, and Dr. Winters knew the truth about what had prompted that inspection. The drawings had been catalogued as evidence in Buchanan's trial, explained away as coincidental by the prosecution. Science had no place for premonitions in a court of law. Leo sat between his parents on their new couch in their new home, one of many rebuilt after the flood. The house was smaller than their previous one, but somehow felt more like a home. Photos of Emma still held places of honor, but now they were joined by new memories. Leo receiving an award for his artwork, Ben's commendation ceremony, Sarah's graduation from her emergency management certification program. Leo was speaking again, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as weeks of intensive therapy helped him process his sister's death and the subsequent events. Dr. Winters had explained that sometimes, when children felt safe enough, they could emerge from selective mutism as suddenly as they had entered it. "I never saw the future," Leo explained one evening as the family sat together in their living room, the spring breeze carrying the scent of new beginnings through the open windows. His voice was still soft from disuse. "I just noticed things nobody else did. Sarah and Ben exchanged glances. They had discussed this moment, knowing it would eventually come. "What do you mean, buddy?" Ben asked gently. Leo set aside his latest drawing, a cheerful scene of the town's new community center. "After Emma died, everything got really quiet for me. Not just because I wasn't talking. It was like all the noise in my head stopped too." "And you started noticing more?" Sarah prompted. Leo nodded. "I saw the tree on Miller's Road leaning more every day when we drove to school. Nobody else was looking. I smelled something burning when we returned books at the library, like hot metal. And the dam, I saw the cracks when we went fishing and then more cracks the next time." Dr. Winter's theory had ultimately proven correct. Leo's selective mutism had indeed heightened his observational skills to remarkable levels. During his silent months, he'd become attuned to details others missed. The pronounced lean of the old oak after heavy rains, the scent of electrical burning he'd detected during a library visit, the hairline fractures he'd spotted while skipping stones at the dam. "But why draw them?" Sarah asked gently. "Why not try to tell us some other way?" "I couldn't tell you with words," Leo said simply, "and I was scared no one would believe me. Drawing was the only way I could make it real." He paused, fingering the edge of his sketchbook. "And I think I was trying to understand why bad things happen. After Emma, I kept thinking if someone had known, if someone had seen it coming." Sarah pulled her son close, feeling the familiar ache of grief mingled now with a profound respect for this remarkable child. "You tried to protect us." Ben, who had taken a leave of absence from the police force to focus on rebuilding their family, ruffled Leo's hair. "You taught us all to pay better attention, buddy." He had finally sought therapy for his own grief over their daughter's death, acknowledging how his emotional withdrawal had pushed Sarah away. Their relationship was healing slowly, built on a new foundation of shared trauma and mutual respect. The town had changed too. A new early warning system had been implemented for infrastructure vulnerabilities, with Ben heading the committee. People jokingly called it the Leo Protocol. Sarah had found purpose in community emergency preparedness, turning her experience into a career helping others plan for disasters. That evening, as Sarah tucked Leo into bed, she noticed a new drawing on his desk. Their family standing together, smiling in front of a community center that hadn't been built yet. The architectural details were precise, down to the engraved cornerstone bearing next year's date. "What's this one about?" she asked, running her fingers over the careful lines. Leo smiled, a glimpse of the carefree child he had been before tragedy struck. "Dad's going to run for mayor next year. He'll win, and his first project will be the new community center. It's not magic, Mom. I overheard him practicing his announcement speech in the garage yesterday." Sarah laughed, relief and joy bubbling up. Leo's gift wasn't supernatural after all, just the extraordinary perception of a child who had learned to see the world differently through tragedy. Later, she and Ben sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies emerge in the spring twilight. "Do you think it was really just observation?" she asked quietly. "The details in those drawings, Ben." Ben was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Maybe it was something more. But does it matter? Whatever it was, it saved lives. It brought us back together. It helped Leo find his voice again." As the stars appeared one by one above them, Sarah realized that the true miracle wasn't predicting the future, but how a family could rebuild itself from the broken pieces of the past, creating something stronger and more beautiful than before. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing about Leo's drawings wasn't their prophetic nature, but how they had forced everyone to pay attention to aging infrastructure, to political corruption, to the subtle signs of danger that people too often ignored until disaster struck. Leo had drawn their future not because he could see it, but because he had helped create it. One careful observation, one silent warning, one brave step at a time. And in doing so, he had taught an entire town that sometimes the most important details were hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to truly see them.